How many of you were here last week? Okay, I should ask it the other way. How many of you were not here last week? All right, then that helps me. Because we are in a series, and I want to tell you a little bit, for those of you who are just joining us tonight, a little bit about the series and, kind of where it came from so we can kind of plug you into where we are this evening. We're doing a series on, I've got a new book out called 9 Things You Simply Must Do to Succeed in Love and Life. And to understand where the 9 things came from, I'll give you a couple of minutes of history of that. For a long time, a lot of my clinical work has been in the context of people in leadership capacities in corporations and organizations and stuff like that. And for over, I won't tell you how many years, but a long time. I'm 26 now, so add it up. For a while, I've been working with a lot of people who just kind of are in high-performance sorts of situations. And what that has afforded me over the years was I get to watch a lot of people who do life well. And in their relationships and work and fulfilling their dreams and all of that kind of thing, I got to watch. And so what happened was, I won't go into all of it, you can read it in the book, but I started noticing in researching and watching successful people, both in their relationships and in life, that successful people tended to do similar things in similar situations. And there were similar patterns that were kind of common denominators in the way that they did life. And so I just, for a number of years, just sort of put on my research glasses and followed them around and watched them and came up with 9 of them to start that they all tend to do. And so that's what the 9 things are. And we are in, what is number 4 tonight? 4. Yeah, really successful people are able to count. That's the first one. And we're going to do number 4 and number 5 tonight. And number 4 is called Do Something. And number 5 is called Act Like an Ant. So if you came tonight and you didn't have anything to do, well, now you have something to do. You got to act like an ant. And what we'll do is let you all crawl around on the floor. Okay, let's talk about the first one. Do something. Once upon a time, I was talking with a lady about her life. And she was talking about a particular situation with actually her sister. And she and her sister had sort of, a interesting relationship, kind of, close but not close. And there were family dynamics, and the parents, were both sort of still in the picture and making things sort of rocky, and you know how those things go. Any of you come from a dysfunctional family? You do? Okay, you understand things like that. So she's in this particular season where they're kind of estranged, and there's sort of a thing going on between them. And what was happening was she was talking about kind of being upset with her sister because of something that her sister had done in the way that she had reacted to her, and her sister had gotten bugged with her and basically sort of blown her off and wouldn't talk to her. And so she was feeling ignored by her sister. And she's kind of like, bugged that her sister's done this, and her sister's bugged with her, and she's sort of, not responding and not reaching out, and is sort of, emotionally and relationally kind of moved out of the picture. And so I'm just listening and not saying anything. And what happened was she said to me, "What are you thinking?" Now, usually that's not what the client says to the psychologist. That's what we're supposed to say, right? But she looked at me, sort of caught me off guard, and said, "What are you thinking?" And I didn't have any other real answer other than to say what a psychologist says at a moment like that. What do you think I'm thinking? Right? That's what they teach you in psychotherapy school. And so she said, "Well, you're looking at me like you think I ought to do something." And I said, well, because I was caught off guard, and she did sort of notice that I was thinking something, so I thought that I ought to do the other thing a psychologist ought to do, which is be honest. And I said, well, actually, I kind of was thinking that. And she said, you were thinking what? I said, I was thinking that you should do something. And she said, what? I said, I don't know. She said, don't give me that psychobabble stuff. What do you think I should do? I said, I don't know. I was just thinking that you should do something. And she said, what do you mean, do something? I said, exactly that. I think you should do something. Well, if you're thinking I ought to do something, what is it you think I ought to do? I said, I don't know. That's what I was thinking. You asked me what I was thinking? That's what I was thinking, that you should do something. And she goes, how can you be thinking I should do something if you're not thinking what the something should be? I said, because that's what I tend to think about you. She said, what? And I said that oftentimes you do exactly what you're doing right now with your sister, that you have a problem and that you sit there and you think that she ought to do something and you do nothing. And she says, well, she should do something. And I said, is she? And she goes, well, no, she's not. And that's the problem. I said, well, what's the real problem here? She goes, well, she's bugged at me. I said, well, you seem bugged. She said, yeah, but it's not my problem. She's the one with the problem with me, so she should come to me. And I said, but you're bugged. And she said, well, I'm only bugged because she's bugged at me. And I said, well, whose bugged is it? She goes, what? I said, whose bugged are we talking about? What do you mean, whose bugged are we talking about? I said, she's bugged at you, right? She goes, yeah. I said, well, that's her bugged. But you're bugged that she's bugged. Whose bugged is that one? And she goes, well, mine. I said, exactly. So whose problem is that? Whose problem is that? She said, well, it's her problem because she's the one that's bugged with me. I said, if it is in your life you're being bugged and her being bugged, then it's your problem. And that's point one of this principle. Now, here's the bigger picture of this. I have never seen a successful person in life, relationally or in work, who were more concerned with who was at fault than they were with making a problem better. Now, let me say that again. I've never seen a successful person, people who do really well, just in life across the board, who were more invested in who's at fault in any situation than they were in solving the problem. Said conversely, people who do well worry much more about how can this problem get solved than who should go to jail for it, or who should go into emotional jail for it, or who should make the first move, or this, that, and the other. And so that's what point number one is, that successful people tend to look at it this way. If it's in my skin, it's my problem. In other words, if I have a feeling of life isn't going well, or this relationship isn't going well, or I don't like what's going on in this relationship, even if it's about the other person being at fault, the problem is in my life. And that's what successful people do, is they put their arms around the problem. Because the problem exists in their life, in their skin. They can feel it, think about it, work through it, not work through it, have all these experiences about it, and that's your life. So, point number one in this point is, if you're going to make the shift to like hyper performance, how do you say that real quickly? Try it. Okay, well, toy boat to you too. You're better than that. Hyper performance. If you're going to make that move, then one of the things you've really got to put to death is an emotional investment on who's at fault here. Who's at fault here? Because that's what people get in tug of wars about. For example, I was talking to a couple of parents about their teenager. And their teenager is sort of reactive and out of control. Imagine that. I mean, it happens. And the teenager would smart off to him and this, that, and the other. And they got in a stance where they were sort of expecting mature behavior out of the teenager. without really doing anything that would make that happen. And it wasn't going to come from the other side of the table. And so when I suggested to them, maybe it's your move. Maybe it's your move to do something redemptive or something good here. They looked at me like, well, no, it's her behavior. It's her move. It's her time to get with the program. And until I could win them over to see, look, this is not about who's the problem behavior or whose fault is it. This is about that this relationship exists in your life and in your house. And the key point is this: a successful person always says, you can write this down because it goes through their heads 8 million times a day. They always say, what can I do to make this better? No matter who's at fault. No matter where it came from. No matter if I inherited it or life treated me this way, they always walk into every situation, and the chief thing going through their mind is, what can I do to improve this? No matter who caused it. So the next point that says, whose bugged is it, basically is the principle of, if it's in my life and I'm bugged about it, it's my problem. Now that we don't care whose fault it is, it's my problem. And so here is kind of the way to think about this. It's kind of like the problem I, encountered when I was writing this book. The thing about writing books is a lot of times the things that communicate most to you don't communicate to other people. That's why there are a lot of crummy books out there. And I've probably contributed to that pile. But editors try to help you out of that mess. And what they do is they change a lot of your words to think that, readers would understand it better if it were like this. So this chapter, or this principle called Do Something, actually, when I originally was working with it over a long period of time, what I called it was, it's your move. It's your move. And that's the metaphor that I find helpful. It's sort of like, if life is a chess game, and what we tend to do, kind of like as natural people, is we make a move and then we wait for somebody else to make a move. And that's kind of where most of humanity is they make a move and then they wait for the universe to give back. But in the way that life is really created and the way that success happens is the other side of the table has always got to move, and my side of the table has always got to move. So it's not like I don't have to do anything while I'm waiting on life to give back to me. It's I've always got to do something. And then life and God and the universe and other people have got their own role that is an always sort of thing as well. And when you look at good relationships, like you look at good marriages, you don't have each other sort of looking at each other kind of tit for tat and, well, I was nice to you, it's time for you to be nice to me or to fix this in some way. What they do is they always have in mind, not only, as Paul says in Philippians, not only looking out for our own interests, but also the interests of others. And it's always kind of on the plate of, what can I do today to make my marriage better? Or what can I do today to help the growth of my child? Or when you walk into your business or your company, when you show up, what's going on is not what is required from me, but what is it that I can do? What can I do to improve this? And what most of us want, you guys look so depressed. I mean, this kind of is bad news, right? But let me give it a little more motivational spin. What if you got this version of it? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. See, that's kind of the same thought. And what we find is that when you look at like people who are just sort of making it through life, what they tend to do is they find out what the requirements are and they meet them. They find out what the requirements are and they meet them. The people who do really well in life, they don't even think about what the requirements are. That's like minimal daily requirement. I mean, they if they're awake, they're doing that. What they're looking for is we want to blow past average. We want to blow past whatever the minimum daily requirement is. I don't want to know what's required of me, because if that's all it's about, anybody can do that, is the way they think. What they want to know is, what's it going to take to make it work? Whatever that is. Whether it's a relationship or some endeavor or some goal or something like that. Okay? So, whose bug is it? Well, if it's in my skin and it's in my life, then it's my bug. All right, so the next point says this: driving your life or along for the ride. Driving your life or along for the ride. Let me ask you a question. If I asked you, where will you be 2 Thursdays from now at 10:45 a.m.? Where would you be? What? Running your staff? Training your staff. Okay. Thanksgiving. Oh, is that No, that's one Thursday. That's just one Thursday, right? Okay, that's what I meant is, okay, well, fine. Let's take Thanksgiving. All right? Perfect example. And better example than 3 Thursdays from now. 2 Thursdays from now, if that's Thanksgiving, and I said, where will you be? Some of you would be able to say, I'll be standing in the kitchen, making the dressing, singing happily, twinkle, twinkle when the slaves come home over grandmother's house or something, all right? And because you're kind of in charge of your life and you sort of know where you're headed, okay? Now, other people might say, I'll be in the kitchen singing the happy songs and making the dressing or whatever, and that's what you plan to do. But if you were to tell the truth, you would be in the kitchen singing the happy songs, making the dressing, only if your psycho, freako, controlo relative doesn't show up a little too early. Or doesn't walk in so inebriated that somebody better not light a candle. Or there's not a blow up with who other relative. I'm glad y'all brought up Thanksgiving. This is perfect. It's so much easier than just a boring other Thursday. But if we did use a boring other Thursday and you asked people, where will you be on a certain day? The correct answer, if they were honest, would be, well, I don't know, because I don't know what dysfunctional person will have control of my life that day. Now, that's the truth. That's the absolute truth. If you look at reality, I'm not talking about the best of intentions. What I'm talking about is there are 2 different kinds of people in the world. Those who, now, and I'm not saying that you can order all contingencies out of your life in the universe. I understand that, bad people happen to good people. That's just something that occurs. And bad things happen to good people, and there's unexpected sorts of things. But by and large, there are 2 kinds of people in the world, and there are actually tests and instruments that are designed to measure this. There are people who basically are in control of themselves. And there are people who life and other people and circumstances tend to control. In other words, there are those who have self-control, and there are others who are the kind of the objects or victims or subjects, or however you want to look at that, of other control. And they really can't tell you, if all were known and all honesty were there, they really can't tell you what they're going to be doing on a given day. Because they might plan to do that, but if somebody calls them 30 minutes before and puts the right guilt message on them, they're not where they thought they were going to be at 10:45. They've dropped their agenda and gotten off course. Now, that's what I want you to look at. I want you to look at your life, and I want you to ask yourself where you are right now, relationally, and in your goals, and in where you're headed, and today, and how you live the day, but in the bigger picture of where you are. To what degree, if we look at a car and it's going across a map and we find it on a place, on a road, and we put the GPS there and we say that's where it is, and we ask the driver, why are you here? Why are you on this road this far towards your destination at this particular day? Some people could say, well, because we planned a trip and we decided to drive across the country, and this is what's today, the 20 whatever, and today this is where we plan to be, and these are the activities we're going to do in this city, and tomorrow we're going to get in the car, we're going to drive, et cetera, et cetera. Other people would say, when you said, why are you here today? They would say, well, we planned to be 1,500 miles further, but then Aunt Sally did this, and then there was this traffic jam, and then there was this, and there was this. And there's always some external explanation for their lives. Let me say that again. There's always some external explanation for their lives. That's what we're talking about. Now, philosophers, psychologists, theologians, performance researchers, relationship researchers, everybody has grappled and seen this issue for years and years and years. And as I look at it and study it, I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 categories that these things tend to get lumped in, but I think we're talking in all of them about the same principle. The first one that you hear, the first word you hear tossed around for this is something called proactivity. Proactivity. Anybody ever heard that term? What that means is that you are proactive in a situation instead of waiting for the situation or life or the circumstances to act upon you. Okay? So proactive means basically get ahead of the game. I think it was Wayne Gretzky that said when they asked him to what did he attribute his great success in hockey, he said, well, most people play hockey where the puck is. Makes sense, right? He says, ever since I was little, I play hockey where the puck is going to be. See, that's proactive. It's ahead of the game. There are some people who are managing this month's finances. That's what they're thinking about. There are other people that are managing their finances and their cash flow 2 years from now, today, because today's was managed 2 years ago. See, they're ahead of the curve. There are some people that when they look at their relationships and they look at their weaknesses, they think, I have this tendency to A, B, C, or D, and they proactively go and talk to the person that they love, they're in a relationship with, and they say, you know what, I have a tendency to sort of A, B, C, or D, and I want us to look at that and how it affects our relationship and get some strategies in place so when I freak out and blow up and all those sorts of, that's just A, that I do, that was a joke, that I do, there's B, C, and D, in other words, I'm crazier than that is what the joke was supposed to sound like, but it was a mature person actually saying this, which kind of put you in the juxtaposition, which is kind of like the essence of good humor when you set it up in one way, and you guys are not really with this, are you? Okay. Why do I feel like Seth Cohen right now? Okay, some of you got that. The point being, they see what's going to happen. They see what's going to happen because of their weaknesses. They don't wait for their weaknesses to do A, B, C, and D and wreck a relationship. They're way down the road before that. They've proactively already dealt with the conflict before it happened. And that's similar in fashion to the play the movie principle we talked about, but this is the active role and putting it to practice dynamic there. So proactivity would say, it doesn't matter what's going on in my relationships, whether I cause it or not, I've got to be proactive to fix it if it exists and prevent it if it doesn't. Proactive means you take the first move, not the second move. That you're an author of life, not just a character in the play. And then the second term you hear about this is something called locus of control. Locus of control. Locus is the Latin word for place. So the question would be, where is the place of control in your life? As you know, how many of you were here for our dating series back when? Okay, some of you were. And one of the things I talked about in that was a lot of people whose dating lives are, why can't I talk tonight? A lot of people whose dating lives are stuck, when you ask them, well, why isn't it working? They give answers like, well, there's just no good ones out there. Or my work tends to keep me kind of away from meeting people. Or. And when you begin to kind of ferret it out, what they actually are saying is, so what you're saying is that the economy and the market and your company's policies and schedules and the population and demographics of this locale and the way the wind blows and whether the dog barked 3 times on Tuesday down the street from your house, all of these things, those are really what control your dating life. They'll go, you got it. That's how they feel. And with some people, you can say, well, how about if we take the steering wheel and put it in your car? Since you got to be in the car anyway. And actually the car called your life that you're going to be driving, what if we actually put a steering wheel in that car? Instead of just down the road for this trip and you don't even have a steering wheel. And because that's how they think. And when you start to try to move them to what psychologists call an internal locus of control, where they would say, okay, not my fault, my skin. Okay? The problem is in my life, it's in my skin, so it's my responsibility. So let's just take, the dating thing, for example. Okay, not my fault that there's only 25 million people in Southern California. I know the market's thin. Okay? That was another joke. Why isn't this working? But that's what you hear people do. They'll give every excuse in the book. But even with the excuses, even when that's true, the winner says, but it's in my life, so it's my problem, even though I didn't cause it, even though it's not my fault that there aren't 50 million people here, there's only 25, even though I didn't cause that, I have got to be the one that deals with it and goes out and finds the others or joins a service or, combs my hair or does something. That there's a proactive move. So proactivity is another way to look at this. Another one is just plain old dependency. To the degree that you end up feeling like your life is controlled by the outside, that's the dependent child position. One of the most interesting things we hear on the radio show is when somebody calls in and says, I've got this crazy person I'm in this relationship with, and they talk about the person, and we say, well, I think what you got to do is you've got to say A, B, C, or D, or you've got to stand up and set some limits, or you got to confront them, or whatever. You can always, always, always diagnose where it's going by the response. If the response is something like, gosh, I never thought about that, or that's a good idea, or I can try that, or I don't know how to do that, can you tell me how to do that, or some other engaging to that there might be something that they could do, then you have hope for that person. They'll work it out. They'll figure it out. That's how life works. But there's another response. If you say, well, why don't you tell him this or do this or this? And they say, but what if he or she doesn't respond? Or, but what if he or she... And they cannot think of doing anything without it being contingent on the way they think about it on the other person's response. So by definition, what they're saying is, I am out of control with my choices because I'm not really free to do the right thing, because what if I get the wrong response back? See, now I'm in prison. What if he gets mad? Or what if she leaves? Or this, that, and the other. So it's the dependent stance of being defined by the outside. And the next one that you hear a lot of times are the words we throw around a lot, called ownership and responsibility. Same principle, I'm just giving you terms for them. And let me read you one of my favorite ways of thinking of this. A lot of people blame life for what it does to them. Okay, they're sort of, the victim of this, that, and the other. And there are a lot of people who are victimized. But here's the way it goes. I can blame life for what it does to me. I can do that. That's right. And we should do that. Bad things that have happened to you that you didn't cause, you should blame whoever for that. That's a part of forgiveness. It's a part of reality. Okay? And you should blame life for the cards that it has dealt you. So I can blame life for what it does to me. But, and here's what separates the winners from the losers, I cannot blame it for what I do with what it does to me. Let me say that again. I can blame life for what it does to me, but I can't blame life for what I do with what it does to me. And every single day, you will run across people who come from very, very similar awful situations. Awful situations. And some of them are stuck, and some of them are not. And one of the factors that goes into not being stuck is that the ones that are not stuck, it's this dynamic. Things have happened to me, but I'm responsible with what I do to what has happened with me. One of the most fascinating things about doing couples counseling, when you work with couples and marriages, is it's really, really interesting to see what people fight about. And the groups that do well and have good relationships and resolve conflict and make it, and the ones who don't do well and stay stuck and repeat them over and over and over, by and large, the problems are identical. Identical. Like somebody fails in some way, somebody's late, somebody's perfectionistic, somebody's sloppy, somebody's financially irresponsible, somebody's got a little bit of a temper problem, somebody's got, give me some more examples. What kind of fights do you guys have? What? Antagonistic. That's major leagues. We're all antagonistic to some degree, right? I mean, these are normal kinds of things. But here's what happens. Some people stay stuck because when those things occur, they go into the fault and you ought to make it better, and they feel like their main role in solving the problem is to get the other person to be different, as opposed to asking themselves, how can I be different and what can I do to redeem this? And basically, once you learn that it only takes one person to change a relationship, the whole world opens up to you. Because, in effect, you are out of log jams. Log jams are over. Now, that doesn't mean that you can go cure a relationship just by what you do, but you are guaranteed to change it. If it's in a log jam based on the dynamic that's going on between the two of you, and one of you changes, that dynamic is no longer possible. Try to have a fight with someone with your mouth zippered shut. You can't do it. It's impossible. Now, they can escalate, or they can get bored, or they can go away. But if you don't respond and you don't get hooked, then you've changed the relationship. Now, here's the point. When you begin to see it that way, then you get out of trying to get this other person to fix the relationship, and you get into a mode of, what can I do that has the greatest chance of being redemptive here? Okay? So just another way of looking at ownership and responsibility. And then what happens here, when you do this, is you experience the gift of freedom. You experience the gift of freedom. Learn this formula. Learn this formula. Freedom, responsibility, and love are always, 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 always equal. Freedom, responsibility, and love. Now, how does this translate? To the degree that we are responsible in a relationship, which means owning our side of things, not blaming, not doing all the stuff where we're dependent, but we're truly, truly responsible and take ownership. And we are free to choose to make it better. We're also free from the other person's not getting better to take us downhill, right? We're free from that. So we're actually free to be better and better and better. And as we take responsibility for that, then we are free to be redemptive. And what happens is, those are the people that create love. to the degree in a relationship, for example, that there's not freedom and we're controlling someone, that we may, control them into liking us, but we can't call it love because there's the underlying sort of resentment. Okay? So the gift that you find in this is that there is the gift of freedom. And where that ends up is in a particular context. It says there, the next one is your move in action. Your move in action. And what that means is that this way of being is going to find a context always in life. It's going to be in your work, in your career, in your relationships, in your spiritual life, or a lot of other places. But it's going to have a context. And what I find is very helpful for people, for all of us, to have kind of a map somewhere of your life where you have the categories, like your significant relationships, your spiritual life, your work, your goals, your dreams, your passions, your wish list, etc., etc. And always ask yourself the question in each of the categories, what can I do to make this better? What can I do to make this better? Now, let me give you an example to sort of close this one out. I have a friend who is just a really, really, really good guy. He's kind of a mentor to me and one of the people I dedicated the book to. But he has a really interesting story. And when you look at really successful people and people who have accomplished a lot, in their marriages and in relationships, but also in work, what I find is that there's always a story like this, the same sort of theme. You can almost kind of write the plot with different characters. Let me tell you his. He was president of ABC. He was president of United Artists. He's done a lot of stuff in media and things like that, and just has this really incredible, impressive resume. I'm on a board with him, and that's how I got to know him. And I asked him one day, I said, Tony, how did you get where you were in the entertainment industry? And he said, well, it's kind of an interesting story. He said, I actually started in the proverbial mailroom. I said, you really started in the mailroom? I mean, that's kind of the myth that everybody says. He says, well, actually, I didn't start there. Here's what I did. He said, I went to college, and my dream and goal in life was to do international kinds of, diplomacy or be an ambassador or some sort of, foreign relations or something like that. I wanted to do something international. And he said, what I did was I went to work at the network, and my dream was to get in the international division. And I had some other kind of cheesy entry-level job. And I didn't know exactly how I could get in the international division. And I applied, and there weren't any openings, and the door was closed, and I couldn't get in the international division. But that's what I wanted to do. He said, I really wasn't interested in entertainment at all. I just wanted to do something international. And, NBC at that time, where he was, had international divisions. He said, so that was my goal. He said, but the door was slammed shut. He said, so I started thinking, what could I do to get there? And he said, so what I did was I figured out that if you work in the mailroom, then you have to deliver mail throughout the building to everybody's office. And so if you deliver mail throughout the building to everybody's office, then you get to meet everybody all over the company. And if you meet everybody all over the company, then you can find out where the openings are and who's hiring who and who's shuffling who around, this, that, and the other. And so this is true. He said, I took a demotion, because he said, I had a college degree, right? He said, I took a demotion to be able to deliver the mail throughout the building. And he said, then I set a goal that if I didn't make it into an international division in a year, then I was going to leave the company and try somewhere else. So he had a self-imposed goal, right? And he started to deliver mail. So he starts to deliver mail, and then he meets somebody in human resources. And he says, if there's any other openings, let me know. right? And so they call him one day and say, well, there's kind of this opening. It's sort of a weird deal. You have to be sort of a assistant to a producer, and it's a radio thing, but it's got international components to it, and they broadcast overseas. And he says, great, what do I have to do? And he said, well, it's a 4 a.m. to 8 o'clock gig. And he says, perfect, I don't have to be at work till 8:30. He says, I'll take it. So he hadn't done anything in radio, so what he does is he spends the weekend, 2 weekends before, he said, and he goes to the library and he studies up on the production of radio programs and this, that, and the other, figuring out how he can meet the needs of his new boss, and he starts to show up 3:30 in the morning, a half hour early, to make sure that he has his ducks in a row. Long story short is he serves this boss so well that the boss says, can you move over to my department? And now he's in international, and he continues, and he said, he just continued to work that day, and one day he ends up the president of the network. Now, I don't think it's an accident that you see someone, succeeding like that. I think when you begin to look at people who have achieved success in any field, that's the quality you see. Now, there's another guy that you've probably, or I've never heard of, and we don't know what he's doing right now because he wanted to be in the international division, but he went home and told his wife, this stupid company, they never see your strengths. I've got all these talents and they promote so-and-so and I'll never, it's the executives around here. They get fat and happy up in those offices and they just never see what I contribute. How many of you have heard that in the past week? You can just write that person's script for the next however many years as long as that's the attitude. But what the winners do is say, so the executives are cheesy, so they don't understand, so they don't see my talents, what can I do to make this situation better? That's the created order of the universe, that God created the universe and he gave us the delegated responsibility to act upon it. Really fascinating little verse in the Bible. It's in Genesis. We kind of go over it like a speed bump. It says that God created the man, and he told him to name the animals. And then it says, and then the Lord God, and I don't remember exactly what the word is, but it's a paraphrase like sat back and watched. He said, then he waited to see what the man would name them. Isn't that incredible? God has given you a life, and he's waiting to see what you're going to do with it. It's your move. That's the created order. And we know from the parable of the talents that it's possible for us to just bury it in the ground, let time go by, and nothing happen. Okay? So, point is what? Do something. What? Something. All right.